Welcome to Hayden's channel on physiology. Today we'll be talking about the nervous system. That shouldn't make you nervous. Alright, so we're going to start with talking about the peripheral nervous system. Over here, the peripheral nervous system is a branch off of the central nervous system. Specifically, the peripheral nervous system is broken up into two separate parts. We have the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. So the somatic nervous system, specifically what it deals with, you can kind of think of it this way. Somatic is what you physically can feel or do. Now, I don't mean like feeling on the inside like you're having a bad day, someone said something bad to you. That's not the somatic, that's a bigger issue. What the somatic actually is like your physical senses. So like I smell something good, I touch something hot, that's all going to go through a branch of the somatic system called the somatic motor system. Somatic sensory system. The other side of the somatic system is that somatic motor system. That's what controls my skeletal muscles and makes me so I can do a jumping jack like that. Really, really important, need that. Onto the other side, we have the autonomic nervous system. Think of this like auto, because everything's on autopilot. You don't have to think about anything going on in here. Of the autonomic system, again, we have a branching of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So the big deal with the sympathetic versus parasympathetic is what are the responses elicited. With the sympathetic nervous system, we have the fight or flight mechanism. Simply, if you see a bear, this is what's going to happen. Your parasympathetic nervous system is what we call the rest and digest. All right, so now that we've gotten some of the anatomies out of the way, kind of the biggest difference or definitions out of the way, we're going to go into talk about some of the anatomies of the two. Biggest difference between the automatic and the somatic is all innervated by one long cord, or rather for every single signal that's allowing me to move my muscles or feel something, it's an uninterrupted neuron. Versus in the autonomic nervous system, it's actually an interrupted neuron, meaning that it goes and then it synapses to add something called a ganglia, and then it keeps on going via a different type of neuron, so it's an interrupted signal. There is some differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic inside the autonomic category, and that's what we're going to talk about real fast. So the sympathetic nervous system is innervated on the spinal cord here, and it's going to make a signal that sort of looks like this. So these sausage-looking thingies here, what I'm drawing is actually called a sympathetic chain ganglia. What that just means is we have a huge chain that runs in line with the spine of these nerves. And we're going to have 4 different types of nerves that are associated in our sympathetic chain. So the first one, and I'm just going to draw this arbitrarily, it's not necessarily where it's coming from, but I'm going to draw this point right here. It's going to come behind and it's going to synapse at this ganglia. So ganglia is just a point where we have a high amount of cell bodies inside or protected by a membrane. The signal goes there and then it continues to be transduced. Then it's going to flow out, but notice how I'm drawing a dotted line, and that's because in our sympathetic nervous system, or actually our whole autonomic nervous system, anytime a nerve synapses, the pre-ganglionic neuron, which is the part coming straight from the spine, is actually myelinated. The other part, after the ganglia, the post-ganglionic neuron, is unmyelinated. So we see that this goes all the way over here, or this goes away, and that nerve, I have forgotten, but I can remember, that nerve is called the spinal nerve. Actually, the spinal nerve is made up of a couple other nerves as well, but they all get bumped into one unit. It's actually the somatic motor, somatic sensory, and the parasympathetic postganglionic neuron, all wrapped into one, but those go on to innervate places in your upper body. Then we get into another type of neuron, same deal, comes around and synapses on here, which is postsynaptic, or that's your ganglia, and then it's going to come and it's going to innervate bunch of other things, like everything in your thoracic cavity, so like your heart and your lungs, everything in this region. That is called, so I should label this, that this one was called this whole thing is called the spinal nerve. And then this thing over here is called the sympathetic nerve. That makes sense. Sympathetic nerve. Okay, now we are actually going to intentionally come down lower on the spine here, past the L6, L7 region, and we're going to initiate a new nerve here, and it's still going to come and wrap around onto this sympathetic chain ganglia, but it's not going to synapse. Notice how our sympathetic preganglionic neuron keeps on going, and we're going to get to this new synapse point. This is called the collateral ganglia. It's just again, a condensed spot of cell bodies lower in this region, in the stomach region, where the synapse occurs. And then we're going to move on to our postganglionic neuron. And that is going to go on, should go to my effectors. And that's going to go on to innervate everything in my abdomen regions, like your stomach and your intestines and that whole party. But there's also, and then this nerve right here is called I just forgot it, but I have it. I have my handy dandy notes off to the side here. Splanchnic nerve. Splanchnic nerve. It's kind of a funny word. Splanchnic nerve. Also off of the same route, I'm not going to redraw it, but just as a point, is we could actually have something, the same nerve that goes through the collateral ganglia, which is this ganglia. It's going to go through, and it's actually going to go on to what we call the medulla, or the medulla, or adrenal medulla, which is the adrenal gland. Specifically, the adrenal medulla is the inner part of the adrenal gland. It's going to synapse here, and that's actually going to cause the release of some catecholamines, or our like neuroepinephrines, or epinephrine into the bloodstream. Those are the four pathways associated with the sympathetic nervous system. Now coming over to the parasympathetic nervous system. Again, going to draw my spine, but I'm actually going to come up above my spine into the cranial nerve. Now there's a number of cranial nerves in them, specifically there's 10, but the cranial nerve we're actually concerned about is cranial nerve number 10. For all intents and purposes, we're going to say that all parasympathetic symbols come from cranial nerve 10. So cranial nerves, they come again from here, and they are actually going to go on, and they're going to have a terminal ganglia. They're going to synapse at their terminal ganglia. And then they're going to go on to their effector over here. So if I had to compare and contrast these two systems, I would, first of all, we know from here that sympathetic results in a fight or flight, parasympathetic results in rest and digest. But a key feature to point out between these two that I didn't do a super good job at emphasizing over here is that sympathetic, they have short I'm going to write pre-G neurons, which pre-G means preganglionic. And they have long post-G neurons, postganglionic neurons. And then our parasympathetic over here is the exact opposite. We have long pre-Gs and short post-Gs. Long preganglionic and short postganglionic. A key feature that they both share, however, is that the preganglionic is myelinated versus the postganglionic neuron is unmyelinated. One last thing I'd like to add on the differences between our sympathetic and parasympathetic is our parasympathetic, when it comes to neurotransmitters, the neurotransmitters found in this system is only actually going to be something called acetylcholine. Both between the preganglionic and the postganglionic when in that ganglia where we see acetylcholine, and then also at the between the postganglionic and its effector, over here, and its effector, we see ACH. So we see ACH here, and we see ACH here. However, over on this side, similar to the parasympathetic, we also see ACH here, but when we get to the effector, most of the time, we're actually releasing something called a catecholamine. And these are usually stuff like epinephrine or norepinephrine, a couple other variations on catecholamines, but the point being is we're using catecholamines to make stuff happen, and they usually are associated with the one. All right, and last but not least, we are going to talk about some receptor types. So follow me over to this side, and the first thing I want to talk about is something called a cholinergic. I said that wrong.
Cholinergic.
Thank you. Cholinergic receptor. That just came from the heavens. Cholinergic receptor. So all cholinergic receptors they accept ACH, or they react with the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Specifically, there are two types of cholinergic receptors we talk about. We have the nicotinic receptors. And then we also have the muscarinic receptors. So the nicotinic receptors, they're actually found between our pre-ganglionic neuron and our post-ganglionic neuron. Specifically, they're found on the post-ganglionic neuron. And when ACH is released into the synaptic cleft, that's where it interacts with N2 to cause another signal transduction, or rather depolarization of the postsynaptic neuron downstream. And that happens in both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Muscarinic receptors we see over here, and these are actually what's going to be found on the effectors, meaning the target of our parasympathetic neurons. These are also cholinergic. So M-odd, and this actually applies for these up here that we'll get to. I'll write these out as muscarinic. So if it's odd, they're actually going to be activating something, or rather increasing the effect. So I'm going to put up for that, and M-even, they're going to be decreasing the effect of whatever it's on. We have a third type of receptor, these ones, called androgenic. And these are found on the effector organs of the sympathetic nervous system. So between, or after the postsympathetic postganglionic neuron of the sympathetic nervous system releases its catecholamine out into its environment, these 5 types of receptors are going to react with the androgenic receptor to do something. And same deal here. If it is labeled odd, it will increase whatever it's trying to do, and if it's labeled even, it will also decrease what it's trying to do. It's not a hard rule, but it's a good rule of thumb, and for as far as the odd even thing goes. So alpha 1, I'm just going to go through and fill out this chart. Alpha 1 is found on blood vessels, and it is also found in the eyes for dilation of the eyes. So in the preferred neurotransmitter, again, is good for here. It's going to be catecholamine. I'll sort of label that cat. And for the sympathetic nervous system, we see it will cause dilation of eyes and dilation of, dilation of eyes and a constriction of blood vessels. Kind of opposite effects, but they do the same thing. Or opposite effects from the same receptor, but the point being, remember, is fight or flight. So if we see a bear, we need our blood vessels to constrict so we can move faster, get more blood moving, and we need to be able to see more. And the parasympathetic nervous system, they actually aren't on this alpha 1 receptor, but they are The chart's actually a little wonky, but it'll work out. So we don't see them on blood vessels, and again, they don't react with the alpha-1 receptor necessarily, but the purpose, on the eyes, we do see that they cause vasodilate, or they see, what's that called? Constriction, pupil constriction. And then for alpha-2s, we actually don't really have a defined place where we see them. They're just kind of everywhere. Again, they're going to do catecholamines, and depending on what their effect or what organ they're on, they're just going to decrease, because it's an odd or it's an even number, decrease whatever that is their effect.
Go.
And then for beta-1, we find beta-1 receptors on the heart. Preferred neurotransmitter, again, it's a catecholamine. And what it's going to do to the heart is it's going to increase heart rate. Again, not that the beta-1 receptor is for the PNS system, so I'm actually just going to put an X here for right now, and then we'll come back to that here in a minute. Beta-2 receptors, they're found in the heart as well, but specifically the coronary vessels. So it's the kind of the vasculature going around the heart, and we also see them on the lungs. Again, it's a catecholamine, and for coronary vessels, it's going to cause vasodilation, and for the lungs, we're going to see bronchodilation. And again, for PNS, we don't really see it there. And then for beta-3, this is found specifically on triglycerides or adipose tissues. They like catecholamines, and this is going to actually cause triglycerides to be broken down into fatty acids. So I'm going to write to free-floating fatty acids. I shouldn't say free-floating, but point being is it breaks down triglycerides, and PNS doesn't have an effect. I'm actually going to go back and say that there is an effect on this one as well, just to stay consistent as far as our chart here, and we'll come back and touch on those. Our M-odd, so again, this is where we're now going from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic. So our M-odd is actually found in a number of places, kind of scattered throughout the whole body, and there aren't really any specific locations that we need to know for M-odd, but what we do need to know is that if it's odd, it is going to do the opposite of whatever of these are. So for blood vessels, they actually we don't see muscarinic receptors on blood vessels, but for eyes, for example, they are going to cause constriction. And that is actually a stimulus, so that's going to be done by an M-odd. Versus something like the heart. If there's M-even receptors on the heart, if the stimulus, because with M-evens we're doing the opposite of what the heart or what the beta receptors or the androgenic receptors are doing. So if this increased heart rate, this is actually going to decrease heart rate. And as long as you follow that pattern, you'll be okay. Alright, just as an appendage to what I said earlier, I kind of got ahead of myself there. I mentioned it, but there are actually some set locations for these muscarinic receptors. I said eyes. Eyes is one of them. We see it in the lungs and sweat glands, and then for M-even, we see them on the heart. Heart rate still applies for sure, it will decrease the heart rate. Muscarinic receptors on the eyes do cause constriction of your pupils, and on the lungs, it actually causes bronchoconstriction, versus the beta receptors cause bronchodilation, because we're rest and digest, we don't need as much oxygen. There is one exception with sweat glands. So, because the peripheral nervous system doesn't actually innervate sweat glands, the parasympathetic nervous system doesn't innervate sweat glands. The sympathetic nervous system kind of pulls a 180, and it's going to actually release acetylcholine instead of the catecholamines to affect these sweat glands, and it's going to cause you to sweat. Cause to sweat.